The Hungerford massacre was a series of random shootings in Hungerford, Berkshire on August 19, 1987, when an unemployed man, Michael Ryan, killed 16 people, including his own mother, before committing suicide. The shootings, with a handgun and 2 semi-automatic rifles, occurred at several locations, including a college he had once attended. A police officer died in the incident, and many people were injured. No motive for the killings has ever been established. It remains one of the worst firearms atrocities in UK history. A report was commissioned by the Home Secretary, Douglas Hurd. The Firearms Act 1988 was passed in the wake of the massacre, which bans the ownership of semi-automatic centre-fire rifles and restricts the use of shotguns with a capacity of more than 3 cartridges. Perpetrator. The perpetrator of the Hungerford massacre was 27-year-old Michael Robert Ryan, an unemployed labourer and antiques dealer. He was born at Savernake Hospital in Marlborough, near Hungerford, on May 18, 1960. His father, Alfred Henry Ryan, was 55 years old when Michael was born. Alfred Ryan died in Swindon in May 1985 at the age of 80. At the time of the shooting, Ryan lived with his mother, Dorothy, a dinner lady at the local primary school. There was extensive press comment on this, suggesting the relationship was unhealthy and that Ryan was spoiled by his mother. A Guardian headline described Ryan as a mummy's boy. In the days following the massacre, the British tabloid press was filled with stories about Ryan's life. Press biographies all stated that he had a near-obsessive fascination with firearms. The majority claimed that Ryan had possessed magazines about survival skills and firearms, Soldier of Fortune being frequently named. Press reports claimed that he was obsessed with the Rambo film First Blood, which was erroneously described as featuring events similar to the Hungerford massacre, when in fact there was no evidence that Ryan even owned a video recorder, let alone that he had seen the film. Sylvester Stallone stated, "I carry the can for every lunatic in the world who goes crazy with a gun." But it wasn't Rambo who sent Michael Ryan mad. In fact, Rambo is the opposite of people like Ryan. He is always up against stronger opposition and never shoots first. Murderers are always saying, "God told me to kill," or "Jesus ordered me to kill so should the rest of us stop praying?" There are always sick people out there who will hang their illness onto your hook. Ryan's true motives are unknown, and it is unlikely that they will ever be known, as Ryan killed himself and his mother, the only other person who knew him well. Dr. John Hamilton of Broadmoor Hospital and Dr. Jim Higgins, a consultant forensic psychiatrist for Mersey Regional Health Authority, both thought he was schizophrenic and psychotic. Hamilton stated Ryan was most likely to be suffering from acute schizophrenia. He might have had a reason for doing what he did, but it was likely to be bizarre and peculiar to him. The local vicar, the Reverend David Salt, said on the first anniversary of the massacre, "No one has ever explained why Michael Ryan did what he did. And that's because, in my opinion, it is not something that can be explained." Ryan's body was cremated at the Reading Crematorium on September 3, 1987, 15 days after the massacre. Licensed firearms ownership. Ryan had been issued a shotgun certificate in 1978, and on December 11, 1986 he was granted a firearms certificate covering the ownership of 2 pistols. He later applied to have the certificate amended to cover a 3rd pistol, as he intended to sell one of the 2 he had acquired since the granting of the certificate, and to buy 2 more. This was approved on April 30, 1987. On July 14 he applied for another variation, to cover 2 semi-automatic rifles, which was approved on July 30. At the time of the massacre, he was in licensed possession of the following weapons: Zablish shotgun, Browning shotgun, Beretta 92 FS semi-automatic 9mm pistol, CZORSO semi-automatic .32 caliber pistol, Bernardelli .22 caliber pistol, Type 56 assault rifle 7.62 x 39mm semi-automatic, M1 carbine .307.62 x 33mm semi-automatic rifle. Ryan used the Beretta pistol, and the Type 56 and M1 rifles, in the massacre. The CZ pistol was being repaired by a dealer at the time. The Type 56 was purchased from firearms dealer Mick Ranger. Shootings: Savernake Forest, The first shooting occurred 7 miles to the west of Hungerford in Savernake Forest in Wiltshire, at 12:30 in the afternoon of August 19. Susan Godfrey, 35, had come to the area with her 2 children. Hannah, 4, and James, 2 from Reading, Berkshire for a family picnic. Ryan approached them with his gun raised and forced Susan to place the children in her Nissan Micra. He then marched her into bushes at gunpoint and shot her 13 times in the back with a Beretta pistol. Police were alerted to the scene after Godfrey's 2 children approached a lone pensioner, Myra Rose. Hannah told Rose that a man in black has shot our mummy. Authorities were still responding when Ryan continued his massacre. A4 petrol station. Ryan drove his silver Vauxhall Astra GTE from the forest along the A4 towards Hungerford, and stopped at a petrol station 3 miles from the town. After waiting for a motorcyclist, Ian George, to depart from the garage, he began to pump petrol into his car before shooting at the cashier, Kakalb Dean, missing her. Ryan entered the store and again tried to shoot her at close range with his M1 carbine, but the rifle's magazine had fallen out, probably because he inadvertently hit the release mechanism. He then left and continued towards Hungerford. Meanwhile, George, having witnessed the attempted shooting of Dean, stopped in the village of Foxfield and placed the first emergency call to the police, reporting that he had seen an attempted armed robbery. Hungerford, Southview and Fairview Road. At around 12:45, Ryan was seen at his home in Southview, Hungerford. He loaded his car with his weapons, and attempted to drive away, but the car would not start. He then fired 5 shots into the back of the car. Neighbors reported seeing him agitatedly moving between the house and the car before he returned indoors and shot the family dog. Ryan then doused his home with the petrol he had bought earlier in the day and set his house alight. The fire subsequently destroyed 3 surrounding properties. Ryan then removed the 3 shotguns from the boot of his car and shot and killed husband and wife Roland and Sheila Mason, who were in the back garden of their house. Sheila was shot once in the head and Roland 6 times in the back. Ryan walked towards the town's common, injuring 2 more people. Marjorie Jackson was shot as she watched Ryan from the window of her living room, and 14-year-old Lisa Mildenhall was shot in both legs as she stood outside her home. Mildenhall later recalled that Ryan smiled at her before crouching and shooting. Jackson then pulled Dorothy Smith, 77, into her home as Smith rebuked Ryan for making noise. Jackson then telephoned George White, a colleague of her husband Ivor Jackson. She informed White that she had been injured. Her husband insisted on returning home and George White offered to drive him. On the footpath towards the common, Ryan encountered a family walking their dog. Upon seeing Ryan with his weapons, 51-year-old Kenneth Clements raised his arms in a gesture of surrender as his family climbed over a wall and ran to safety. Ryan ignored the gesture and killed Clements, who fell to the ground still clutching the lead of his dog. Looping back to Southview, Ryan fired 23 rounds at PC Roger Brereton, a police officer who had just arrived at the scene in response to reports of gunfire. Brereton was hit 4 times, his car veered and crashed into a telephone pole. He died sitting in his patrol car, radioing to his colleagues that he had been shot. Ryan next turned his weapons on Linda Chapman and her teenage daughter, Allison, who had turned on to Southview moments after Brereton was shot. Ryan fired 11 bullets from his semi-automatic into their Volvo 360. The bullets traveled through the bonnet of the car, hitting Allison in her right thigh. Ryan also shot through the windscreen, hitting Linda in the left shoulder. As Ryan reloaded his weapons, Linda reversed the car, exited Southview and drove to the local doctors, crashing into a tree outside the surgery. A bullet was subsequently found lodged at the base of Allison's spine. During a subsequent operation to remove it, surgeons decided that the risk of paralysis was too great, and the bullet was left in place. After the Chapmans had driven away from Southview, George White's Toyota Crown drove towards Ryan. Ivor Jackson was in the passenger seat. Ryan opened fire with his Type 56, leaving White dead and Ivor Jackson severely injured. White's Toyota crashed into the rear of PC Brereton's police car. Jackson feigned death and hoped that Ryan would not move in for a closer look. Ryan moved along Fairview Road, killing Abdul Rahman Khan, who was mowing his lawn. Further along the road he wounded his next-door neighbor, Alan Lepetit, who had helped build Ryan's gun display unit. He then shot at an ambulance which had just arrived, shattering the window and injuring paramedic Hazel Haslett, who sped away before Ryan was able to fire at her again. A crowd had now gathered, and Ryan shot at windows and at people who appeared on the street. Ryan's mother, Dorothy, then drove into Southview and was confronted by her burning house, her armed son, and dead and injured strewn along the street. Ivor Jackson, who had been shot 4 times, was still slumped in White's Toyota. He heard Dorothy Ryan open the door of White's Toyota and say, "Oh, Ivor," before attempting in vain to reason with her son. Ryan shot her dead as she raised her arms and pleaded with him not to shoot. Ryan then wounded Betty Tolliday, who had stepped out of her house to admonish Ryan for making noise, as she had assumed he was shooting at paper targets in the woods. He then ran towards Hungerford Common. The police were now informed of the situation, but the evacuation plan was not fully effective. Ryan's movements were tracked by a police helicopter almost an hour after he set his home alight, but this was hampered by media helicopters and journalists responding to reports of the attacks. A single police officer, who observed Ryan, recommended that armed police be used, as the weapons he saw were beyond the capabilities of Hungerford Police Station's meagre firearms locker. Hungerford Common and Town Centre. On Hungerford Common, Ryan went on to shoot and kill young father of 2, Francis Butler, as he walked his dog, and shot at, but missed, teenager Andrew Cadell, who sped away on his bicycle. Local cabbie Marcus Barnard slowed down his Peugeot 309 as Ryan crossed in front of him. Ryan shot him with the Type 56, causing a massive injury to his head and killing him. Barnard had been redirected towards the Common by a police diversion as communication between ground forces and the police helicopter remained sporadic. Anne Honorbone was slightly injured by a bullet as she drove down Priory Avenue. Ryan then shot at John Storms, an ambulance repairman had parked on Priory Avenue. Hit in the face, Storms crouched below the dashboard of his vehicle. He heard Ryan fire twice more at his van and felt the vehicle shake, but he was not hit again. A local builder named Bob Barkley ran from his nearby house and dragged Storms out of his van and into the safety of his home. Ryan then walked towards the town centre of Hungerford, where police were attempting to evacuate the public. During this, Ryan killed 67-year-old Douglas Wainwright and injured his wife Kathleen in their car. Kathleen Wainwright would later say that her husband hit the brakes as soon as the windscreen shattered. Ryan fired 8 rounds into the Wainwrights' Datsun Bluebird, hitting Douglas in the head and Kathleen in the chest and hand. Kathleen, seeing that her husband was dead and that Ryan was approaching the car whilst reloading, unbuckled her seatbelt and ran. The pair were visiting their son, a policeman on the Hungerford force. Coincidentally, Constable Wainwright had signed Ryan's request to extend his firearm certificate only weeks earlier. Next was Kevin Lance, who was shot in the upper arm as he drove his Ford Transit along Terence Hill. Further up Priory Avenue, a 51-year-old handyman named Eric Vardy and his passenger, Stephen Ball, drive into Ryan's path while traveling to a job in Vardy's Leyland Sherpa. Ball later recalled that he saw a young man clutching his arm and running into a narrow side street. As Ball focused on Lance, Ryan shattered the windscreen with a burst of bullets. Vardy was hit twice in the neck and upper torso and crashed his van into a wall. Eric Vardy would later die of shock and hemorrhage from his neck wound. Ball suffered no serious injuries. Throughout his movements, Ryan had also opened fire on a number of other people, some of whom were grazed or walking wounded. Many of these minor casualties were not counted in the eventual total. At around 13:30, Ryan crossed Orchard Park close into Priory Road, firing a single round at a passing red Renault 5. This shot fatally wounded the driver, 22-year-old Sandra Hill. A passing soldier, Carl Harris, rushed to Hill's car and attempted in vain to apply first aid, but Hill died in his arms. After shooting Hill, Ryan shot his way into a house further down Priory Road and killed the occupants, Jack and Myrtle Gibbs. Jack Gibbs was killed instantly as he attempted to shield his wheelchair-bound wife, Myrtle, from Ryan with his own body. Myrtle succumbed to her injuries 2 days later. Ryan also fired shots into neighboring houses from the Gibbs house, injuring Michael Jennings at 62 Priory Road and Myra Jeter at 71 Priory Road. Ryan continued down Priory Road where he spotted 34-year-old Ian Plale, who was returning from a shopping trip with his wife and 2 young children in their Ford Sierra. Plale crashed into a stationary car after being shot in the neck by Ryan. His wife and children were unhurt. Carl Harris again rushed over to administer first aid, but Plale's wound proved to be fatal as he died in an Oxford hospital 2 days later. After shooting and injuring 66-year-old George Noon in his garden, Ryan broke into the John O. Gaunt Community Technology College. Suicide: Ryan barricaded himself in a classroom in the John O. Gaunt Community Technology College, where he had previously been a pupil. It was closed and empty for the summer holidays. Police surrounded the building and found a number of ground staff and 2 children who had seen Ryan enter. They offered guidance to the police on how to enter, and of hiding places. Ryan shot at circling helicopters and waved what appeared to be an unpinned grenade through the window, though reports differ whether Ryan had one. Police attempted negotiations to coax Ryan out of the school, but these attempts failed. He refused to leave before knowing what happened to his mother, saying that her death was a mistake. At 1852, Ryan committed suicide by shooting himself in the head with a Beretta pistol. One of the statements Ryan made towards the end of the negotiations was widely reported: "Hungerford must be a bit of a mess. I wish I had stayed in bed." Police response: Hungerford was policed by 2 sergeants and 12 constables, and on the morning of August 19, 1987 the duty cover for the section consisted of 1 sergeant, 2 patrol constables and 1 station duty officer. A number of factors hampered the police response. The telephone exchange could not handle the number of 999 calls made by witnesses. The Thames Valley Firearms Squad were training 40 miles away. The police helicopter was in for repair, though it was eventually deployed. Only 2 phone lines were in operation at the local police station which was undergoing renovation. By chance there was a British Special Forces team passing the area on return from a training exercise. They were armed as usual including instant CS gas, a non-lethal weapon. Upon reaching the police cordon they asked the policeman in charge if they could help. The initial intention was to gas and bag the assailant. This offer was turned down. Official report: a report on this incident was commissioned by the Home Secretary, Douglas Hurd, from the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police, Colin Smith. The Firearms Act 1988 was passed in the wake of the massacre, which bans the ownership of semi-automatic centre-fire rifles and restricts the use of shotguns with a capacity of more than 3 cartridges. Ryan's collection of weapons had been legally licensed, according to the Hungerford report. Notoriety: the Hungerford massacre remains, along with the 1989 Monkston shootings, the 1996 Dunblane School massacre, and the 2010 Cumbria shootings, one of the worst criminal atrocities involving firearms to occur in the United Kingdom. Cultural references: the Sears debut single, Lightning Strikes, was about the Hungerford massacre. The song In These Times by The Fall, from the 1988 album The Friends Experiment, contains the line "Man down south, he did go out, he did kill 15, which is almost certainly a reference to the Hungerford massacre. J.G. Ballard's novel Running Wild centers around the fictitious Richard Greville, a deputy psychiatric advisor with the Metropolitan Police Service who authored an unpopular Minority Report on the Hungerford killings, and is sent to investigate mass murder in a gated community. Ballard professed an interest in the Hungerford massacre and other pointless crimes such as that in Dunblane and the murder of Jill Dando. One Bloody Afternoon by Jeremy Josephs is a non-fiction description of all the events of the afternoon, describing each killing. The Hungerford massacre inspired Christopher Priest's 1998 novel The Extremes. Sulk, the penultimate track on Radiohead's album The Bends, was written as a response to the massacre. Chris Bosher, founding member of the band Radical Dance Faction, was a witness to the events and wrote Hungerford poem, which appears on the band's early album Hot on the Wire. Spoof rap group Goldie Lookin' Chain mentioned the killer in their song, Guns Don't Kill People, Rappers Do, a satire on the supposed links between gangster rap and gun crime as reported in the press, like Michael Ryan, about to snap, Guns Don't Kill People, it's just rap. Marvel Comics mentioned the Hungerford massacre as background for their fictional mutant anti-hero Pete Wisdom, stating that his mother was one of the victims. The Smiths were due to release the single Stop Me If You Think You've Heard This One before around the time of the massacre. However, the song was later prevented from being released because it coincidentally contained the line, "and plan a mass murder." However, Morrissey later allegedly touched on the subject of Hungerford with the song Michael's Bones included on My Early Burglary Years. The BBC showed a documentary on the Hungerford massacre on December 7, 2004. The 1988 LP by Jack Ketch and the Chroming called Brimful of Hate featured a track called The Ryan Factor. The sonnet in the Greenwood by Clive Wilmer remembers the tragedy and one of Ryan's victims. The 2013 Channel 4 drama series Southcliffe follows the events and personal repercussions of a mass shooting in the fictional town of Southcliffe, the events and location of which contain very strong similarities with the Hungerford massacre. See also: List of massacres in Great Britain and Northern Ireland, List of rampage killers, Hoddle Street Massacre, Port Arthur Massacre, a similar but deadlier spree killing in Australia. It took place less than 2 months after the Dunblane massacre, prompting similar gun law reforms. Southcliffe, references. Sources: Josephs, Jeremy. The Hungerford Massacre, Montpellier, February 21, 2013. M. Barker and J. Petley. Ill Effects, The Media Violence Debate Communication and Society. Routledge. 2 Reverend Ed Editio ppA 63 €77. ISBN A0-415-22513-2. Webster, Duncan. Who Done It? America Did, Rambo and Post-Hungerford Rhetoric. Cultural Studies 3, 173 doi, 10.1080/095023889004901221A.